All right, wonderful.
I'll let people in so you don't have to worry about that.
Oh, okay, sorry. Again, it's just like a habit. I'm an overachiever, I guess. Glad that was recorded. Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session for today, A Tale of Two Cures, Librarians and Course-Based Undergraduate Research Experiences. So just a couple of Zoom etiquette reminders. If you're not one of us, please keep your audio muted. We will have some time for Q&A towards the end. And at that point, we'll let you know when it's okay to unmute. But just for the sake of the recording, it's a lot easier audio-wise if there's really only one person unmuted at a time. If you have questions or comments in the chat, please feel free to put them there. I will also be asking you a question in just a couple of minutes here that you can answer in the chat. If you do unmute to speak in that Q&A session, please do identify yourself. Sometimes with the way Zoom is laid out, it's a little bit hard to figure out who's where. And we will ask that you not draw on our screen or do your own screen sharing while we are presenting. It says unless prompted. Don't worry, we'll not prompt you to do these things in our session. So this is the link to our slideshow, and I think Sam might be able to put it in the chat for us. Wonderful. So if you want to follow along or if you want to look at it later, we do have quite a few active links here that you could look at and explore on your own if you're interested. And we also have a references list at the end, which is just another thing that you can explore from there. And I am going to let Sam introduce herself.
So hello, my name is Samantha Sam Harlow. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the online learning librarian at UNCG, and I'm housed within the Research, Outreach, and Instruction Department, ROI, which makes me also the liaison to community and therapeutic recreation, kinesiology, and public health education, which that's what I'm going to talk about today.
All right, and I'm Jenny Dale. I'm the Information Literacy Coordinator at UNCG. I also use she, her, hers pronouns. And I have 5 liaison areas. I'm in the same department as Sam. My liaison areas are classical studies, communication studies, English, media studies, and women's gender and sexuality studies. The course we'll be talking about today is within the English department, so one of those areas. So I really wanted to start out with some background on kind of the what and the why of cures before we really jump in. And before we go further, I am going to ask y'all to use the chat and let me know if you're familiar with this concept of cures. So you can write yes or no, or Sam, excellent, Sam. Sam is familiar with this concept. Amy, who is our boss, is also familiar with this concept. Good. Okay, got some no's. Never heard the acronym. Oh, hey, Elizabeth. Somewhat. So we're kind of across a continuum here. Don't worry. At the end of this presentation, if someone says, are you familiar with the concept of cures? You'll be able to say, absolutely. So with that in mind, I'm going to switch and start talking about these. So what CURE stands for is Course-Based Undergraduate Research Experience. And one of the things that makes a CURE kind of a unique type of initiative is that there's really no single accepted definition of this term, especially across disciplines. Everyone agrees on what it stands for, but they don't agree on what it means. And there is a really interesting community called CUREnet, which is a community of educators and researchers. And they have defined CURE as a project that engages whole classes of students in addressing a research question or problem that is of interest to the scientific community. And we'll break this down a little bit more, but this is sort of one of the more frequently used definitions. But again, there's really no full consensus on what this means. But stepping back a little bit, if you were in Patrick and Teresa and Shannon's excellent presentation earlier today, you heard some things about high impact practices, or HIPs. And this is, these were identified by George Koo in work with the AAC&U in a publication from 2008 called Liberal Education and America's Promise. And it's a set of practices that have been widely tested and have been shown to be beneficial for college students from many backgrounds. And the educational research suggests that these HIPs increase rates of student retention and engagement. So there's sort of just a general acceptance in the field of higher education that these HIPs practices, including undergraduate research, are good for students. They increase engagement, they increase retention, they increase persistence to graduation. So there's just kind of this general agreement that these are good educational practices. And undergraduate research is one of them. And typically when we think about undergraduate research, we might think about a sort of one-on-one faculty-student intern program. One of the things that we have to be really aware of when we think about those kind of programs, especially that one-to-one faculty-student work, is that as Banguera and Burnell showed in 2014, students have a lot of barriers when it comes to seeking those kind of experiences, those one-on-one faculty-mentored undergraduate research experiences. Several of them have to do with awareness, as you can see here, awareness of existing opportunities, of the benefits of those opportunities, and of sort of the norms that are associated particularly with scientific research. Students typically have barriers in terms of how they perceive their ability to interact with faculty. And then there are very real financial and personal barriers. On the faculty side, when faculty members are considering becoming a mentor, there are some selection factors that can be really problematic. So one is that faculty members try to assess the sort of mentorship potential of students, and they often do this based on metrics like GPA or prior research experience that ultimately can bring in issues of unconscious bias, and that can lead to preferences that are based on race, gender, and socioeconomic status, which can mean that some students are actually left out of this process, even though they could be excellent student researchers and could really benefit from it. So in the same article, Banguera and Burnell say that cures can actually be part of a solution to this problem, which they've referred to as a bottleneck. And they think that restructuring the initial entry point into undergraduate research is the way to do that. So one of the things that they talk about in their article, and they suggest that I think is really interesting, is that if there are required cures in lower level or introductory courses or courses that are required for students to take that have a cure element, that can really serve as sort of an entry point or a gateway to let students who get really into the idea of undergraduate research know what their sort of next steps are if they want to seek out some faculty-led one-to-one kind of experience. And that might be able to introduce some of the inequities that we see in access. So I mentioned this sort of research internship idea as well as the cures idea. And this is from Auchincloss from 2014. This is a report of people working with CureNet, which I mentioned earlier. They got together and had a meeting, and the main goal of that meeting was to kind of come up with a definition for cures. But as part of that work, they also identified some of the differences between a traditional undergraduate research experience or internship and a cure. And so some of the differences that you can see here relate to scale, mentorship structure, enrollment, time commitment, and setting. So when we have a research internship, I'll start with that one, even though it's all the way on the right, very few students are going to be able to be involved, and it's going to be a one-to-one instructor to student ratio. So that means it's really only available to a few, and they tend to either be selected by the professor or self-selected. And as we saw just a moment ago, those self-selections and professor selections can be problematic in terms of that bottleneck that Banguera and Burnell described. This also has to happen outside of class. Again, that's something that can be difficult for students. I'm thinking about our students at UNCG. Many of them have jobs, they have family responsibilities. They might not be able to invest time outside of class. And the setting is typically going to be like a research lab, whereas cures can reach many students. And it's sort of a good return on investment, I think, for instructors, because it can be one instructor to lots of students. It happens within the class experience for the most part, and it's open to everyone in the course. There's really low barriers to entry. and what we would consider this to be is kind of a teaching lab. In this same article, Auchincloss and colleagues described 5 dimensions of a cure. And those are use of scientific practices, which you might see I have a little kind of footnote here. When we hear cures discussed, though it is often in the context of the sciences, the natural sciences, physical sciences, the life sciences, it is actually something that can happen really in any discipline. So sometimes definitions will refer to these 5 dimensions, but will say use of disciplinary practices instead of scientific practices. Discovery and exploration is the second dimension, broadly relevant or important work, something that goes beyond the scope of the classroom. Collaboration in a variety of ways, student to student, as well as students working with faculty. And then finally, iteration. So those are the dimensions that they sort of came to an agreement on when they were working on operationalizing a definition of cures. So I just want to tell you a quick story about this pie chart, which seems very simple, but it took me quite a long time to create. I wanted to go into the literature and just kind of see where cures were being discussed in terms of sort of disciplinary background. So what I did was I did a search in some selected EBSCO databases that we use at UNCG, Academic Search Complete, Education Source, ERIC, CINAHL for health sciences, because I knew we were talking about health sciences today. I think I used the MLA International Bibliography, and also I think maybe PsycInfo. And what I did was I looked at scholarly research articles from the last 10 years where people were discussing these course-based undergraduate research experiences. And I removed some of the results that came up. So when there was an article that was just a literature review, or there were even a couple of annotated bibliography type sources, or if it was an article that was focused only on faculty development or teaching people how to lead cure courses, I removed those. And what I ended up with was 100 articles, which was nice because it made for an easy pie chart. And I looked at each article and determined which, because each of these articles basically had at least one case study description of a cure course. And so I looked at what fields these were in, and you can see huge biological sciences. Biological sciences I used to also include biochemistry, genetics, ecology, zoology. I tried to use that kind of broadly, but many of them were in like biology courses, strictly biology courses. Chemistry, the next 13%, so 13 examples in chemistry courses. The next is 10%, which was in STEM courses. These were either like STEM introductory courses, so maybe you're just in a STEM field generally, and you take this kind of STEM 101 type course, and then some of them were more interdisciplinary. And then I folded several other STEM fields together. Engineering, computer science, and geosciences were also represented. And then the final two here, two of the smaller ones, are actually the fields we're going to be talking about today, which I thought was interesting. 5% were in the health sciences, either medicine, nutrition, or sort of more general health sciences. And then there were 2 in the humanities and fine arts, 1 in music and 1 in history. So from this, I had some sort of general conclusions. One, it was very clear to me that cures were being implemented primarily in these STEM fields, and particularly in biological sciences. That seems to be where it's caught on the most. As a result of so much focus being on science courses or STEM courses, a lot of the case studies I saw focused on laboratory courses, that hands-on sort of experience with laboratory materials, doing experiments, that kind of thing. I also was surprised to see that cures were being integrated really across the undergraduate curriculum. I saw a lot of introductory courses included, which was something that surprised me. I kind of often think of cures as being kind of an upper level major course, or again, these sort of lab courses, smaller enrollment, that kind of thing. But that wasn't the case. Just to give you some background on why this matters at UNCG, in 2017, our director of undergraduate research was leading a team that won a big research award grant that was all about cures. So the purpose of the grant was to promote development of cures, create a network of developers across different institutions. I think it was 5 institutions in the UNC system, and then to create a cure summit for students, faculty, and administrators who might be interested. A little bit more recently, so the following year, this is particularly important to my part of this presentation, we got a big Mellon grant. So we got funding from the Mellon Foundation for transformative initiatives aimed at increased participation of humanities undergraduates in research. And so we're trying to, like, again, if we think back to the slides before, here were our humanities. And while I'm sure there are many more than just the 2 I found in my searching, when we look at sort of how the scale compared to some of these other areas, I think it makes sense why we would be investing money into trying to really integrate more of this kind of work in humanities areas. So I'm going to talk a little bit about English 106, which is Introduction to Poetry. And this is typically a larger enrollment English class. It's mostly non-majors, although sometimes there will be an English major in there here and there. And it is a general education class. So it fulfills a literature requirement for students in our general education program. And like I said, it would typically be larger enrollment, but because of the Mellon funding, the 2 different sections that I worked with in spring 2020 were limited to 25 students because they were going to be writing intensive. And at UNCG's, courses that are marked as writing intensive have to be capped at 25 students fewer. And this funding was provided to the course instructor to actually integrate the sort of cure concept into his 2 sections. So he and I began brainstorming in November of 2019. And when we were doing that, again, as you probably saw from the literature earlier, I was struggling to find examples of how people have integrated cures in the humanities. And I was also having a lot of trouble, and this is still the case, having a lot of trouble finding examples of librarians working with cure courses. And it makes sense in the context of those sort of science laboratory courses to some extent, although I think there's still some library intervention options there. But there's just not a lot in the LIS literature about this. So I was hitting a lot of dead ends. But what I did find were some interesting practitioner resources. And 2 that I found most useful were the Arts and Humanities Division of the Council on Undergraduate Research, or CURA, that's how I say it. I don't know if there's an accepted pronunciation. And then another university, Trinity University in Texas, has a great page of Mellon Initiative resources. So they have a sort of similar Mellon kind of funding model to what we have. And again, you've got the link to this slideshow. And if you open up the slideshow, these are all clickable links if you want to look at these to learn more. When I was looking through some of these resources and doing some searching and trying to sort of figure out what the landscape was, I found a few things, mostly from Council on Undergraduate Research, either that Arts and Humanities Division or sort of the more broadly applicable Council on Undergraduate Research. But a blog post from CURA from 2018 was a great resource for me, and the suggestions there for arts and humanities cures or undergraduate research experience in general, focusing particularly on lower level courses or lower level students. The recommendations were things like campus and community exhibits, having students contribute to existing digital humanities websites or projects, doing manuscript transcription, or curating or cataloging collections. So collections that might already exist, for example, in a library or an archive or in a museum, and having students actually participate in curating and cataloging those. There was a really interesting post from the CURA editorial team pretty recently about moving an undergraduate research conference online. And again, I have that linked here. So that's another thing that came up after this course, but I think could be something really cool for a class like this in the future. And then what I really ended up with was library or museum exhibits, which were recommended by Sand and colleagues in a 2017 Council on Undergraduate Research, like kind of newsletter practitioner publication. So that's what we went with. And the way that we planned to work together on this course was to have 2 face-to-face library instruction sessions that would be scaffolded. They would build on each other. In the first one, we just talked about finding poetry reviews, or generally things that you might find online or in a sort of poetry journal. And then we had one planned on evaluating and finding other types of secondary sources. And this was part of that iterative element, that iterative dimension of Cures. They had one face-to-face visit planned with our special collections and university archives. And then we were going to cap it all off with a student-created physical exhibit featuring recommendations from the Kirby Smith Poetry Collection. And this is a donated and currently funded collection by the Kirby Smith family, who have a lot of connections to UNCG. And it's all modern American poetry. So they gave us a big donation that we processed. And then every year I'm able to add more titles to the collection with the endowment they provided. Here's what actually happened, because of course, spring 2020 was a challenging time. So we ended up with just that one face-to-face library instruction session. So very introductory. We just talked about finding poetry reviews. We did a little source evaluation, but we didn't dig too deep. They were able to do their face-to-face special collections and university archive visit. And then what we ended up with in the end was a virtual exhibit. Featuring those student recommendations. And in the end, this did require more work from me than what we initially anticipated, but I think it turned out well. So I'm just gonna give a very quick, I guess I'm just showcasing this quickly. This is their public research adaptation. That was the name we came up with for the final assignment. And what this is a site that's essentially a virtual exhibit. I used Google Sites to create it. So if I go to this one, for example, 1970, 1989, you'll see for each title, there is a picture of the book that was provided to me by the students, some basic bibliographic information, and then some recommendation text that I quoted directly from each student. I didn't include students' full names here. I just used initials, although you will sometimes see students who took the picture like with the book and they had themselves in it, took a sort of book selfie, I guess. So there is some identifying stuff on here, but you wouldn't know their full names because this is a publicly available website. So this is what it ended up looking like. I think we probably had, I think there's a total of about 45 or 46 books that are featured on here. And so this ended up replacing what we saw as a physical exhibit that would showcase the books and the recommendation text. So I thought about those dimensions from Alkenclass and how they applied to the course that I worked with. And I think that they applied very well. So overall, in terms of use of disciplinary practices, there were a lot of disciplinary conventions that they had to learn for writing about poetry. They did explore a body of knowledge, which was the Kirby Smith Poetry Collection, and they discovered things based on their interests. And then they had the autonomy to actually choose one specific collection or text to focus on for the rest of the semester. The broad relevance, the relevance beyond their course, is that this was publicly presented research. One of the people who has access to it is Tom Kirby Smith, one of the people who actually did the original donation, and he was very excited to see his collection being used. And collaboration was pretty limited on this, partly due to COVID-19, but partly because it wasn't really something we focused a lot on in creating the course. And then iteration, students, and I wasn't very involved in this, but students iterated throughout the semester in that they engaged with their texts in a wide variety of ways. They did sort of some personal writing, they did some creative type writing, and they did a lot of analytical writing. So just to wrap up my part, my lessons learned from this are that cures are not well represented in the humanities teaching literature or in the LIS literature. So I think there are some gaps there that would be really interesting to explore. I learned it's really important to be flexible in times of crisis, and that it's also helpful to explore alternative options before giving up. When I talked to the instructor, his instinct had been sort of, let's not do the final assignment anymore. But I thought that we could take it online and students could still see their work presented in that more public way. But with that in mind, choosing my technology wisely was so critical here. And I also had to lean into the sort of collaborative elements because I needed students to provide me all the content so that I wasn't searching everywhere trying to find those pictures and the bibliographic information. I actually sort of had all that and I could just quickly take it and place it into Google Sites, which was something I was familiar with and felt had like a pretty gentle learning curve. And then finally, and this is something that's going to connect me into Sam's session, or Sam's part of the session next, being embedded in Canvas. This wouldn't have worked if I wasn't embedded in the Canvas course for these two sections. That's where all of the assignments were turned in. That's where I got all of the content that I had to use for the site. If we hadn't had that Canvas connection, I honestly don't know I don't know that this would have worked, because they would have had to put, it would have been an information management nightmare. They would have had to all put in a Google Drive or a Box or something like that, and it would have been really difficult to manage. So that's mine, and I am going to actually stop sharing.
So you did have some questions. Do you want me to read them to you?
I can look at them. I will read them out. Did you create the website or did students contribute? So I used Google Sites. I created the website myself. Students contributed the content, but they weren't actually contributing the work that I created. From Elizabeth, did you find that using a public renewable assignment motivated students to produce high quality work? Yes and no. This is a course, again, that many students were taking because they needed to fulfill a requirement. So I recall, for example, one assignment, like the .docx name was like stupid poetry assignment .docx. So I don't think everybody was super on board, but I was really impressed overall with that. And I think students were really excited to be able to see their work being publicly presented. And I know the professor was really proud of them. All right, I'll turn it over to Sam and I'll keep an eye on the chats for you, Sam.
Okay, great. So y'all can hear me okay, I assume. Can you hear me okay, Jenny?
Yes, sorry, I was muted, yes.
Okay, so I am going to talk now about my CURE experience with HEA 447, which is public health education. So before we get started on my specific story of working with a CURE class, which Jenny set up really well, I want to kind of piggyback on what Jenny said about how important it was for her to be shifting into the online component and to be embedded in Canvas. So around fall 2018, we sent out a survey to every student at UNCG taking an online course and every teacher teaching an online course. And we found a lot of great data, but the data we probably used the most in terms of our, the way we kind of shifted our online learning services within Canvas was that students said they did not like being taken out of Canvas. They said that anytime an instructor took them out into Canvas to try to find resources or whatnot was very frustrating. They got confused. They definitely wanted everything linked there. Sorry, my dog is barking. So anyway, so based on that and my experience in Canvas before my job as the online learning librarian at UNCG, I was an instructional technology consultant and trained on Canvas, was that we decided to build a lot of services up within Canvas. So we have this guide that is linked in the presentation that kind of goes over all of these service points that we have within Canvas, our learning management system. And as I'm kind of showing this off, if people want to talk about their experiences, if any of you have ever been embedded in an online course, worked with an online course at your university in terms of information literacy instruction or programming, you can let me know. just kind of understand where everyone's experience level is. But here are all the things that we can do in Canvas at UNCG. So we do have a library resources tab, which is an integration, something called an LTI with LibGuide, SpringShare LibGuide, which means that every course at UNCG that has a course number and students register for has this library resources tab that then embeds a LibGuide, and it depends on how the liaison sets it up. So it could be a course guide, it could be a subject guide, it could be multiple guides. And then we also have this something called a fail-safe guide, this default guide that shows up if no metadata is added to a course guide. So, you know, that they'll at least see this as long as the instructor keeps it on, where they can get access to our catalog, see all of their department research guides, and chat us. So according to the numbers, this has now become our most viewed LibGuide by far. And I haven't checked the numbers after everyone was put online in spring. I would wonder if that has changed it as well. I would assume so. This has been really nice as again, SpringShare LibGuides integration. We also have a librarian role in Canvas where instructors can add us in the People's tab as a librarian, which puts us in the course as basically a designer, where we can participate in discussions, we can add content, we can see all the announcements that come out, and all of that stuff. So it's really a nice feature that was easy to turn on with a kind of just one conversation with our ITS department. We also have tutorials set up in Canvas Commons, which is the Canvas Learning Object Repository. We recently just added our research tutorials in there as well. And you can see here instructions on how to do that, instructions on how to look, and it also has a lot of OER, open educational resources as well. So we have instructions on that. We have library integrations with a variety of products like Gale. We have instructions about how to put permalinks in Canvas, films on demand, etc. And we talk about how liaisons, right, all the different librarians can create content within Canvas as well. So from there, I do want to talk about too that we also like to put we have a new suite of research tutorials. So some of you, I know I recognize your names, you've probably seen that we have been using PATH for years to have a suite of research tutorials about information literacy concepts. But because of how much students want to be put into Canvas, we did also make them available within Canvas Commons as modules. And these are about a variety of things, but again, I wanted to talk about this in terms of kind of making that like online learning connection to these CURE classes that Ginny and I have been working with. So, so now just to talk about my specific course. So HEA 447 is a public health course on looking through different parts of society, right, in terms of public health components. So looking at different components of connecting things like race, ethnicity, demographics to data. So it's a very heavily data focused course. So it's a 400 level class, which at UNCG is an upper level course that every major has to go through. So every student in this course, unlike what Ginny was saying in terms of it being a 100 level course that she worked with, again, most of them were juniors or seniors. All of them had to take this in order to pass and get this public health degree. And 447 is a part of the public health education's fully online program component that they have as well on public health. So it is an online asynchronous course, and it's been online for years. It was online before this instructor applied for CURE and got it and integrated the CURE components within there that Ginny went over. So also this instructor is a very experienced instructor with online learning. This is a little different than Ginny's story in that she had been teaching it online for years, but then decided to really integrate the library more within this CURE framework based on winning something called a UNCG Library Information Literacy Stipend. So I know, again, this is a small group, so I know some of you have heard of this, but this is a stipend we give to faculty members. Jenny sets it up as our UNCG Information Literacy Coordinator. So if you have any questions about that, she can help answer them in the chat. But faculty apply, talk about their learning objectives, talk about how they're going to integrate information literacy learning objectives within their course and connect it to their student learning objectives. And then if they win, it's a very competitive grant. A lot of people apply and only a couple people are able to get it. They get $1,000. So this was our first online course that was not only cure-based, but also, won this information literacy stipend. So, and I'm going to talk about what I did, but some of the tools we used for this online course was H5P, which is an interactive, free, open source HTML5 creation site, group discussions, and Canvas Studio. So again, this instructor is a very experienced online teacher, and she was already using H5P and a group kind of framework for this course before I came into the picture to talk about how we could better integrate these information literacy student learning objectives as well. So we use something called Canvas Studio in order to create these very interactive videos, and I'm going to go over how that went. I created some about these information literacy components, and the students also created videos, and I'm going to talk about that. But again, I'm aware that not everyone has Canvas and therefore doesn't have Canvas Studio. So Canvas Studio is an interactive video, software that says, sorry, I got distracted. So Canvas Studio is a video platform within Canvas that allows you to either create videos within the platform or upload your own videos or link to YouTube videos. And then it embeds them within discussions where students can have discussions on different time points within your video, very specifically, as well as it has pop-up quizzes. Both can be graded. These are integrated within your grading system if you want them to be, or they can be a pass-fail. Every student at UNCG as well has access to this system where they can create screen recording systems and embed them within discussions as well. So we do pay money at UNCG for Canvas Studio as an add-on to Canvas, our LMS. But if you are not at an institution that has Canvas or Canvas Studio, you're not paying for this extra feature of Canvas Studio, there are alternatives. There is Edpuzzle and something called PlayPosit. I've seen Edpuzzle be used more frequently, but PlayPosit is another one that works pretty much the same way, where you can have these interactions pop up. H5P, again, it's free and open source, so it's pretty easy to use because it creates these HTML5 interactive tutorials. It also has a feature where you can upload videos from YouTube and have pop-up questions embedded throughout, as well as use the embed features to put them within discussions. And then also it really depends on what your university has. So at UNCG, based on this flex of that we will all be going to online learning, we just got an institutional license for Panopto. If your university has this, maybe they have this as well. But the big thing is that you would want something that you feel safe using, that's kind of approved by your university, that the instructional technology people can help you with, but also that students can use. Because a part of this interaction and having students engage with the research in this way that Jenny talked about was having the students create these videos as well. So here's what it looks like. So here is a picture of a Canvas page where I was, again, like Jenny talked about, enrolled as a librarian within Canvas. I created these library resources. I created a LibGuide for the course, as well as an 11-minute video about something called PEO, Population Exposure and Outcome. It's very similar to PICO if any of y'all are health science librarians, in terms of helping students think through the health science research in that way. You know how we love our acronyms. So I made a very specific LibGuide catered to that had information about PEO, that had information that had the videos in there, but also I had the video uploaded into Canvas. And the video, what it did is it went over the LibGuide, it went over searching in databases, creating keywords using PEO, and then finding articles, where to find the permalinks, and how to build a citation. So it was pretty long because the teacher wanted me to have all this, but again, it was this 11-minute video that had pop-up quiz questions that were not graded, that went throughout to engage the students in that way. So here's a screenshot of what it looked. So their final product was creating an annotated bibliography within groups on different topics related to public health for this course. So again, the video, you can see here, these little icons were pop-up questions that came up throughout the video, right? That kind of just engaged them and said, made sure they were paying attention. Again, the teacher here chose not to have it be a graded activity, but Canvas Studio does have that ability. And again, the free tools would not allow grading integration, but there are other tools to track that if you're interested. So here's an example of one of the questions that was asked when we were talking about the difference between Google Scholar, and library databases. Just again, a quick pop-up question to make sure that they were paying attention, where I asked, Google Scholar only feeds me articles that cost money. You know, and then they answer, and then based on their response, they also get feedback. But I also want to show you that Canvas Studio, if you are at UNCG or end up getting Canvas Studio at your university, also has a really nice, they show you the quiz results, and they also show you analytics of how your students engaged with the videos. So then after they watched that video, they had these 4 groups, right? Housing and mental health, food insecurity and sleep, employment and substance abuse, alcohol, tobacco, education and physical activity, obesity. And then this was the prompt put in by the professor, Carrie Rosario. And then the students would have to make their own videos of creating keywords and then searching within library databases. And then the group members all commented on those videos. And then the professor and I were also able to comment, like, oh, great use of keywords, but have you thought about trying this as a synonym? Or like, oh, I really liked how you used this ProQuest database. Remember to also try CINAHL to kind of find some alternative results, and that kind of thing. So that is how it went. So here's some assessment from the students. I want to have time for y'all to ask questions. It mostly went great. So they do their own assessments at the end, which I'm still working on the professor of that, but we also, because it was connected to this UNCG Library Information Literacy Stipend Program, we had very built-in assessment plans that Jenny has us make. It's really great. As the information literacy coordinator. So here are some of their responses. So it improved my knowledge of researching the database. They were able to connect using PEO and keywords, right? They said they got a better sense of what to look for in the articles and the journals. So we talked about the timeline of articles and connecting it to health sciences, right? Like in terms of making sure that you understand the peer review process takes a while. So they connected to that idea from the video. So I like this quote here. This time I had to actually pick the best of the best, which was also hard, where they used to feel like they were choosing the worst of the best of the worst. So that was good. And then they said they learned to navigate the site and access various resources, and that they feel like they approached the annotated bibliography better in the end. So that's it. I wanted to wrap it up and again have time for questions. You can see my email address and Jenny's on there. And I'm also going to put it in the chat, but Jenny's also still here. So if you have more questions for Jenny or for me, I think these sessions are 50 minutes, right? So I wanted to have time for people to ask questions. Sorry, mine was kind of brief.
Sorry, mine was really long.
So if anyone has any questions though, or wants to see it in more detail, I didn't want to go into the Canvas course because of, protecting the students' identity. The group discussions are like the students' faces are all over it with their names and grades. And so I couldn't really go in there, but hopefully the screenshots and me talking about it kind of gave you an idea of what we did. And Jenny gave such a great introduction to what a cure is that I didn't have to talk about that at all. That was nice. So yeah, are there any questions? Okay, so someone said they're starting at the UNCG's MLS program this fall.
Yay, welcome.
Welcome.
Elizabeth Ellis has a question.
Ask away. You can unmute yourself, Elizabeth, or put it in the chat.
Hello. Oh, I don't think my sound is working right now.
No, I can hear you.
We can hear you now.
Okay. So when you're working on a project like this with a course, how much of your time does that take up, I guess? Like, how do you balance that with all the other, stuff that you do during a semester?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll go first. Because this was a UNCG information literacy grant, Carrie Rosario, Dr. Rosario applied in the spring and then found out she got accepted. And then we had to really have all of our like plans and ideas developed throughout the summer. So that gave us a good push, right? So that like I had time to kind of schedule out making this 11-minute video. But saying that, I've now, after I did this, I actually now I promote that I can do these kind of Canvas studio videos in other courses. That's actually what I like typically recommend with UNCG faculty because they've become more familiar with Canvas Studio. And then again, the students have accounts. So if they want to do activities, it gives me this good tool to kind of use for that. So with other ones I've done, because of how time consuming, that HEA 447 was, where I was really like embedded and involved with the discussions and the videos, and it was an 11-minute video, I make shorter videos, right? Like I just do like a 2-minute video about keywords or about like just accessing their guide, and then I really, really, really promote emailing me, if they have any questions. And I also really heavily promote using our chat. Because a lot of these students in online courses are non-traditional students, they work jobs, particularly in a lot of my programs in the health sciences. They're working jobs during the day, they have kids, that kind of thing. So again, the chat is something I heavily push to, kind of follow as they're searching. And then I really kind of pick a couple of key components, right? Like getting to Sport Discus, right? Which is a huge kinesiology database, or like getting these major public health guides or resources depending on the course. So again, I kind of pick and choose to not have it dominate my time. Jenny?
To be honest, Elizabeth, it's really hard. It's hard to balance these kinds of experiences that we know are high impact, and we know that they are good uses of our time. And we also know that they have, they're rewarding for us. And that's something that we do try to keep in mind, but like, it's a struggle for me when I do sort of embedded work. I know many of the people in here know me, like this academic year, I taught 100 one-shots. And that's a lot for someone in my position or for someone, period. It's a lot for someone to teach. And so that balance is really hard to strike. I felt fortunate with this class that we did a lot of the work towards the end, kind of like Sam was saying, doing a lot of the work and planning in the summer. We did a lot of work in planning, really after the fall semester had ended. This did end up taking, it took me a lot of time to create the website, just sort of it wasn't hard work, but it was time consuming work. So I don't really have a good answer. I don't think I'm great at striking that balance. But I do think it's important if you have these kind of opportunities and you have the time and sort of the bandwidth, that you can take advantage of them, because they can lead to other really meaningful opportunities. Like I imagine that Sam and Carrie will work together on this class forever now, probably.
Yeah. And like Jenny said too, like the good thing about a CURE course is that because it is so integrated with research, right? It is such an opportunity for the library. So to me, like that's a good investment of time, right? To say like, well, this class, because CURE class, because it has these very clear ways that it integrates with like our information literacy learning objectives, means that like it's worth it for me to maybe spend a little bit more time versus like I'm thinking about another course where I used Canvas Studio, which was a Kin 300 level course where it's a huge lecture course. And they really, like the teacher there just really wanted me to tell them how to find a peer-reviewed article. Like they needed one for a lab, you know, right? And so like that one is a different ball game, right? Because I'm just really directing them to sport Discus, you know, and then saying like, here's the filter for peer review, right? And so for that one, actually, like, again, the video was 2 minutes. It didn't take me very long. I didn't do any fancy editing, right? Like I just like screen recorded over that puppy, threw on some closed captionings and like called it a day. So I think you just have to kind of choose, right? Like what is worth an 11-minute video that I'm really like taking time to like go over all the nuances of keywords and like all this stuff. Like, is it important to the learning objectives, or like, is like the student just gonna be like, oh, this is an 11-minute video. I just needed to know how to find a peer-reviewed article. You know, pick and choose your, I don't want to say battles, because like I like doing this stuff. I know Jenny does too, but you know, like pick and choose how, like, you know, you're not gonna be able to make an 11-minute video for every course. You're not gonna be able to make a Google site for every course, right? Like, and have your students on how, like that's too much. Like, you know, we're all humans. And I don't think the teachers want, like, you know, like I don't think, like Carrie and I are friends. Like we were friends before this course. We'll be friends after it. And like, you know, Carrie knew that this course was where she could use the library and my skills best, you know, but I don't do this. I come to a lot of Carrie's courses, but I don't do anything like this for a lot of them, right? Depending on if they're lower level, like again, her learning objectives, that kind of thing. Sorry if that was too much. Did I cut you off, Jenny? Sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, I know we're almost at 2. Does anyone else have any questions before we end it? I want to be cautious of your time. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming to the first ever Tatler conference.
Yeah,
that was fun. And the schedule that Rachel sent out that I think everyone has access to through that Google Doc does have, I'm double checking, I believe it's at the bottom. Yes, there is an assessment form there. I'll just also go ahead and link it in here for those of you who are left for the whole sort of conference experience. So yeah, thank you all so much. Please feel free to contact us. Again, Sam has been great about posting the link to our slides. If you want to go there, you can find our contact information.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to end it. Have a good day. Bye, Jenny. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.